Thank you, Arindam, for accepting the invitation for this Journo Talk series for listeners of NetworkThoughts YouTube channel, and welcome to the show. So we'll begin with some, understanding your background and basically how long have you been in journalism?
Thank you, Amaya. Thank you. I feel honored that you have called me. You are one of the few person that I look forward to getting a perspective on anything and everything that's happening in Indian sky, and it's really a privilege that you have called me to your show. So, regarding starting my background, so of course, as as usual, I have studied engineering, mechanical engineering. It was, but my college also offered a course of economics, which I studied 4 years along with engineering also, and so I also have a graduation degree in economics. After economics, I look forward. I always liked reading and writing. So I thought, why not take up writing as a business, as a profession? To be frank, I did not like the regimen of Indian engineering so much. So I was based in Chennai, and there's this college in Chennai, Asian College of Journalism. I wrote an entrance test. I got through, and that was a 11-month course, and that really widened up the perspective for me. The course was so beautifully structured that it gave me exposure right from Indian economy to Indian politics to Indian defense and how the corporate world works to everything. There are many people who came and gave guest lectures, which really added to my knowledge. After ACJ, I directly got placed in business standard, and normally how it works in Indian news media houses is that basically they'll give you the vertical in which they have a vacancy. So it's not your liking. Thankfully for me, that was in 2016, I presume. Yes, 2016, and the aviation beat in business standard was open, and they asked me to cover it. And it was always fascinating. My house in Calcutta, and I had posted photos on Twitter and Instagram also. Like the terminal building is very closely visible from the terrace of my house. And of course, I always looked at those. And when I started covering aviation, it gave me a different kind of perspective, because when I saw the aircraft landing and all, I started identifying those aircraft, which models were those, and I started following them on Flight Radar. So there was normally a fascination about covering the subject, and getting to write on that is a privilege. After that, that's it. I got to the, and thanks to people like you who really helped me to understand complexities of the matter, and that's it.
Interesting one. So you have been tracking flights before Flight Radar came on the radar or on the
right. Yes, absolutely.
So you did not need any software to keep tracking the place. You could see it.
No, absolutely not. So right from my terrace, the Kingfisher hangars are the most closest object from the terrace that I saw. Unfortunately, those are no more in use. But after the Calcutta airport had an old terminal, and then it became modernized. So after modernization of the terminal, the view is much more better and much more closer.
Right. Interesting. I think you should start charging people for a half-hour visit to your house on terrace, and that would be a good ancillary revenue for you, going by the airline term.
That's a good idea, and yes, you interestingly use this term, ancillary revenue.
Yeah. So good. So you're the first person from the family to get into journalism, or you have a background of somebody in the family being part of this fraternity?
No one in my family is into the business of journalism. I have a cousin who mostly writes as a part of his hobby, and of course he gets paid for that, but that is not something mainstream. As a livelihood to take up writing, to take up journalism, it's the first in my family to do so.
Interesting. So
yes, Amaya, there was great apprehension from my immediate family and from my extended family that what I was trying to do, because journalism was not seen as a profession that is monetarily lucrative, and of course the kind of journalism for people was like covering crime, chasing behind police, chasing behind criminals. So that was not something my family envisaged for me to get into. Luckily for my father, who worked as a retired as a bank manager from State Bank of India, Business Standard was a newspaper that came to banks, and he was a regular reader of it. And a job offer from Business Standard really helped my cause. So that was the time when nerves were calm, and of course, my father thought that okay, it's okay to try a career in business writing.
Interesting. And if not a journalist, then what would you have been?
If not a journalist, I at that time I was trying everything. So possibly the biggest chance is that I would have probably landed up in a coaching center to try the civil services.
Okay. So interesting one, interesting journey, right? From right next to the airport in Calcutta to Delhi
Right.
via
Right.
Chennai.
That was just a sheer of luck. I think like that when I joined Business Standard, there was a vacancy in aviation, and I was given to cover that. I think that's a pure
Yes,
coincidence, but
that was
it
going
has
to
been
be
wonderful.
my next question. Actually, how did you end up in aviation? Was it choice, force, or luck? And I can clearly see it was a mix of luck and being at the right place at the right time just worked
Correct.
out for you, right? Great,
Yes, exactly.
interesting,
Exactly.
interesting part.
So I joined Business Standard, and that was the time when the person covering aviation had moved organization. So that was the big, primary beat, and aviation is a large beat for any business newspaper. So I was given to cover that, and that's how it started.
Interesting. So apart from aviation, which other sectors do you get to cover? And those sectors are by choice or force or luck again?
So I have always have a keen interest in this business of sports. So like basically how the teams work and on like the revenue from IPL or the football league or anything. I've always remained intrigued with how these things work out. So that is something I keep on writing as side of aviation. Other than that, in 2018, again, the person covering automobile in Business Standard had shifted out, and there was a chance to take it up. One of my senior proposed whether I would like to look at it. I thought that since the basic factor in aviation being there were only three listed companies when Jet Airways was there, and after Jet Airways there remained only two listed companies. And as a business newspaper, of course, listed companies matter the most. So I thought that it would increase my value in the organization also, and I would learn something new also if I cover a bit as large as automobile. So that was when I started writing on automobile, and since then it has been a vibrant sector, and I should be very frank about it. Like I do like writing on automobiles. I do like researching the new features of a new model and all. But probably that was never comparable. The love and the liking I have for aviation, say probably learning about the features of an A320neo will never be equivalent to as compared to like learning about the new features of an SUV.
True. Any parallels you see between the two industries? No, one thing that comes to my mind is the market share of Indigo versus the market share of Maruti, both being
Hmm.
over 50%. And I clearly
Hmm.
remember the first time, and this was many years ago,
Hmm.
Maruti Suzuki had put up a one-pager ad across
Hmm.
newspapers saying their market share is more than the market share of entire competition put together. If I'm
Correct.
not wrong, it was JD Power or some other survey which had given
Yes.
that
Yes.
much before
Right.
the monthly numbers which come out on automobile side.
Right.
But any
Right.
parallels that you see because you closely cover those sectors. So rather
Hmm.
than following, covering
Hmm.
those sectors gives you a different sort of insight
Perfect.
and uh, value. So what do you see as a similarity?
The similarity that I see is that is one of the things you mentioned about the market share part. I think for Maruti it happened by the distinction is that the Maruti it happened through a consumer led preference, and the company building up its service networks, and also, of course, for any Indian family, the first choice when he or she wants to buy a car, invariably the first or second choice becomes a Maruti. For aviation, I think it more than a market-driven and consumer-driven growth, it was also because of the restructuring and the phases that the other companies went through. Like Indigo was again present at the right moment at the right time, like starting from Kingfisher's demise, then Jet Airways, then in between SpiceJet's almost near bankruptcy. So more than consumer preference, and you know it better than me, like in terms of like treatment to passengers and all, except maybe now the reliability is affected. There is not much difference between the services that the Indian low-cost carriers provide. So in automobile, it happened through a consumer preference, through a better service provided by the company. But in aviation, I should say it also happened due to the weaker financials of Indigo's rivals. In terms of policy, automobile is a much more larger beat. The ramifications of what is done in that industry is felt further wide in the economy rather than as compared to aviation. The companies create a lot more number of jobs than an airline or an airport can do. So they naturally have a much more say in the policy that the union government prepares. Like I can give you one example about the taxation, like the taxation structure on cars, and similarly, like ATF, India is one of the highest tax country in terms of automobile if we compare to developing nations. But the noise that the aviation industry has been able to make in terms of taxation being relaxed on GST, and it's still happening vis-a-vis the GST taxation structure, the demands the successfully that has been met by the automobile industry is quite in contrast. So the power of bargaining between the aviation industry and the automobile wins hands up.
Interesting. So let's get to aviation. As part of your job, I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of people, be it
Right.
ministers, civil servants, CEOs, so many of them, right? So, is there any memorable interview that you have? One person with whom you had just an awesome time interviewing?
So, as a journalist, of course, the most important or the most likable interactions or interviews happens when those are off record. Like I understand the companies have a certain obligations to follow to their shareholders, to their customers. So there's a certain limitation that they can talk when they're on record. So most of the interviews for a journalist, which are memorable for a journalist, happens off record. In terms of the on-record interview, I should say the first person that I interviewed as an aviation journalist was Fitak, the first CEO of Vistara, who has now moved to his parent Singapore Airlines. So I remember running late for the interview, and I was new in Delhi, and there was this traffic jam that I got caught into. I had no sense of the distance and time at that point. I reached for the interview at least 20 minutes late, and I was pretty displeased about myself. But the way FETEC conducted that interview and like came down to at that moment, at that time I was not very like up to date with terms like say ASK or a CASK or a RASK, but the level he came down to have me explain that, and that was that point of time when Vistara was undertaking their reconfiguration of the cabin. They are actually making the cabin denser. So to explain that case, like why they are doing it and how making the cabin denser increases the revenue optimization of an aircraft, to help me, and I should say I was almost a layman at that point of time. Therefore, that FETEC took in that, I think, 40 or 45 minutes of interview, despite me being abnormally late. That is something that I will remember for my entire career. Like that really helped me to get into the industry, to gel into the industry more. Besides than that, I one of the interviews that I did. I think at that point of time was Mr. Amar Abrol. Like he was the CEO of AirAsia India, and uh, of course the shareholder dispute was going on at that point of time. There was an article in one of the papers saying that is AirAsia an Indian airline. Amar Abrol spoke his hearts out, like saying that why of course, like true to his duty, he was defending, like, wow, the business is still run from India and it is an Indian airline. But he was open to all kind of questions and he never shied away from anything. So those two interviews, I will remember always, and will stay with me for a long, long time. And the other thing I should also mention is that, like, that's the and not because of its content, but as a high point in my career was when the Indigo co-founder Rakesh Gangwal agreed to speak to me at the height of the dispute between the promoters. He agreed to give an interview which in which he agreed to be on record. So that is one more interview that I would remember.
Interesting ones. So with one to remember with the market leader and one with the now most sought after Tata Group. Interesting one. So on the same note,
Correct.
any interview which was the most difficult one, either to get hold of the person or during the interview, it did not go well as planned.
Mr. Gangwal was one interview that was very difficult to get hands on. He's a very reticent kind of person, and I had to pass through him multiple times. There were n number of mails that I wrote to him before he agreed to speak to me. That was one interview that I had to push a lot. In terms of like that did not go well in anything. I should in aviation I should say no, because I really prepare for my interviews. I take a night at least to prepare for them. I read through it, and you know it very well. Like I try to understand concepts from you also before I go for any kind of interview. So no, there has been no unpleasant memories as such in between an interview. I should say no.
Interesting. So now more of a hypothetical question. If you have to interview somebody, the
Mm,
biggest personality that you think in aviation, which
mm,
would be a big opportunity for you, who would that
mm.
be? Just one person you would love to interview.
I would love to interview Sir Tim Clark because of uh, how outspoken he is,
Hmm.
about his knowledge of aviation, about his knowledge of aircraft, and his open-mindedness and his willingness to help the journalist also understand the factors. So Tim Clark is one person that I would really want to sit down and have probably a longer interview with.
Interesting. And there are many outspoken people in that neighborhood in the Gulf, but you have chosen Tim Clark. So that's an interesting one.
I should say, because I think there was this interview that Tim Clark gave in Air Current, and the depth of that interview really impressed me about when he spoke about the kind of aircraft, the choice that the any airline goes into, the details that any airline goes into before selecting a particular aircraft, about the range issue and everything. So that is not something that a CEO would often have time or would have the scope to speak to you in an interview. But uh, he being he, I think he brought it out very well. So as a student of aviation, I should say, that is something I really look forward to.
I hope and wish that you get this interview soon.
Yeah, I hope to.
Yeah. So, no, the last few years, media is changing rapidly. A lot of times it is clickbait. There is a race to be first to break the news, and it's all about breaking news. So, any
Hmm.
news that you remember, like, was your breaking news something which was industry first, and you were the first one to break it, be it on Twitter or the article itself which you write?
There have been multiple such opportunities, but one thing that in recent, I remember is the this significant factor that the government agreeing to uh, control airfare and capacity, the decision that was taken, I think, last May in 2020 when the aviation was being restarted after a gap of 2 months. So I was hearing about that for a long time from my sources that there has been something, such a kind of thought. But as a journalist also, I was very unconvinced about it that the government can go to such a land because it's an extraordinary step for a country which believes in free market. But having spoken to it, I think I spent almost 4 to 5 days on it, and thankfully, the fast nature of journalism did not clash with the time I took to write that story. But yes, I was the first to break that story that India will put a price cap and a capacity cap to maintain the market dynamics. And I think after 3 or 4 odd days, there's this press conference in which the then Civil Aviation Minister Hardeep Puri confirmed that there will be such a thing. So yes, that one I remember writing.
Good one. I remember reading that as well. So something out of my list of questions actually. Do you remember the first aviation story which you covered? Uh, like the first one when you joined Business Standard, which was it, and how did you get it?
The first story that will be in my mind is something. If you remember, when I joined in 2016, the National Civil Aviation Policy was being conceptualized, and the industry was divided over it about how 520 should go or 520 should stay, and there was uh, 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 big lobbying over it.
Hmm.
So one, I was trying to chase that, and as a newbie, it was very difficult because I was also trying to get my head around what these concepts are about, but also then to get to speak to the right kind of people to understand that and what the airline's thinking was very difficult. In that case, I should just mention. There's this no more. The blog is no more there, but Flying Engineer Vasuki, who goes by the name of Flying Engineer, he used to write a blog at that point of time, and he was pretty active then, writing in terms of what the demands were the legitimate and not. One article that I particularly remembered, that why the FIS demand of F20, the FI, I mean the lobby group, which consist of the existing carriers at Indigo, SpiceJet, GoAir, and at that point of time Jet Airways, they were saying that 520, taking away 520 will be against the level playing field. He very beautifully giving, as he always does, mathematical figures, ASKs, and everything, explained how it is the demand is not at all legitimate. They were not impacted by that. So of course, like reading those articles and all, I understood that. So I think one fine day, there were these three airline bosses, Mr. Bhatia, Mr. Ajay Singh, and I think from GoAir, Wolfgang was in GoAir at that point of time. They called, arranged a meeting to make us understand the concept, and that was one of the first stories that I wrote. And I was, to be frank, I was in awe at that point of time that I was sitting again across the table against three airline bosses, two of them being the promoters. So, but that story, I remember it was, I think it was during the first 1 or 1.5 month of me joining Business Standard that I wrote.
Great. That got back some good memories for me because some of my suggestions made it to the National Civil Aviation Policy. In
Yes,
fact, I had a
absolutely.
chance to meet the Honorable Prime Minister for that, get on
Right.
Doordarshan as a special show. So interesting memory. And I
You had flown down to Delhi for that, if I
yes,
remember.
yes, absolutely.
Right.
And I think I should let Vasuki know about the kind words which you have spoken about him. Of course, I'll share this with him when it is published on YouTube. But
Right.
before that, I should let him know about the kind words for sure. Right. So no, let us move on. So I asked you about breaking news, right? Any news which you knew beforehand and you wish you would have broken and it came out from some other publication or somebody else.
In that case, I should say, there was this buzz coming on, people mentioning that all was not well between Mr. Bhatia and Mr. Gangwal at Indigo. One person even went to the extent of telling that they are not seeing eye to eye. That was almost 4 to 5 months before the story broke. But looking at the complexity of that story, looking at the stature of those two individuals, I was very cautious. I was talking to people, trying to get a head around that, like what was going wrong, like trying to collect substantiative inputs to write that story, which unfortunately I never got. And my publication is a very cautious newspaper. They demand a lot of due diligence before publishing a story, which I was not able to do. And I think one of the TV channels broke the story after 4 to 5 months that one of the two, both the two have appointed lawyers, and of course that was formal at that point of time. And so that is one thing I regret not being able to, because I was very aware that such a thing was going on, but not being able to write that, not being able to get enough material to substantiate that story, that is something I will always regret.
Imagine knowing this 4 months before and not making it public, and how it would have been had it been public 4 months before, not just for you but also for the promoters.
Yes, correct. So I remember when there was a flash coming into my mobile saying that both of them have appointed lawyers, and it was automatically a shit that came out from my mouth. That was like, so that I will always regret.
Interesting. So you talk to so many people on record, off record. Any interesting insights about dealing with the ministers? And from 2016 until now, it's the same.
Yeah, dealing
with the ministers. It's so to say the same government, but still there have been about 4 or 5 civil aviation ministers, MOS as well as Minister of Civil Aviation. So how was your dealings with them? If you don't want to take names, some interesting insights on who is the most responsive, or who takes care of the sector the most, or any interesting tidbits you have to share. Because all have had been holding their fort in their own right from the first one who had to leave because the alliance broke off. Then everybody had certain part into it and taking it forward. But how was it while dealing with them at a personal level?
To be fair to everyone, everyone had their imprints, everyone had their contributions, and everyone did their mistakes. And our ministers are not very well known to being proactive on a sector like aviation. And as a journalist, I should say that probably the sector needs a much more focus from the top echelons of the government. But yes, there have been ministers who have been very good, and I should mention Mr. Jayant Sinha. I don't want to quantify in a report card how much he has been able to achieve as a civil aviation minister, but he had great vision and great thoughts for the sector. And I think his exposure to the private sector as an investment banker or serving in the United States as in the private sector industry gave him a lot of exposure how things should be done, and how what major role private sector should play in the civil aviation industry. And as a person, I'm a great proponent of private sector coming into business. I believe that it increases the efficiency of the business multiple times. So Jayant Sinha is someone that I always Jayant Sinha is someone that I'll always remember, will remember interacting with him, even in terms of off record. He was extremely responsive to the queries I had on and off to ask him. But especially during his point of time when URAN was being conceptualized, he went to a great length to explain the network multiplier effect that connecting smaller cities can give to India's civil aviation, and drawing in a whiteboard, especially with nodes and all properly, like the network, how it will probably connecting a Shirdi to Mumbai, and then Mumbai to Pune, and then back to Mumbai, and then to London. Such a wide network can be developed if the smaller airports can be developed under Udan. So this kind of thing that Mr. Sinha went to a great length to explain to a journalist, not many people do. So that is something I would always cherish. In terms of a recent example, like I think I should remember Mr. Hardeep Puri. Like I think that was FA came out with an order of reciprocal action against India, saying that Air India's flights would be curtailed to US because India was not allowing the American airlines to fly at their full capacity. So I had sent a question to him saying that what should the step forward now, US being such a strong and powerful ally, and his one cryptic reply was that by afternoon everything should be sorted. I didn't know what he meant about that. That by afternoon everything should be will be sorted, and but by 3 p.m. government announced the first air bubble arrangement that India had with US, and then we followed it with every other country. So these two things I remember. But again, I want to again mention that Mr. Sinha has been someone, again, as a student of journalism, that you would really want to talk to, want to understand things from him.
Interesting insights which you give, Arindam. So the last question, we come to the end of the show. You have been seeing this sector for a while, tracking this for a while. Everybody has an opinion about this sector. Where do you see this moving from here on? 50% with Indigo, 25% with Tata, rest with Go and SpiceJet and the smaller players, AXA coming up, Jet Airways 2.0, COVID, so many things. But what are your thoughts when you talk to so many people, when you track this on a daily basis? Where do you see this move?
I think it's very clear the sector is moving towards a clear duopoly now. It's an Indigo versus Tata that will be deciding the course of Indian aviation. Very much depends on the kind of restructuring what the Tatas will be or won't be able to do with Air India. Lots of hopes and expectation, and we keep on writing that they have these plans, that they have those plans, but as of now, those are in PPT format, and how they will be executed on the ground, which is very, very different from giving a PowerPoint presentation, is something that will decide whether Indian aviation is the Indigo versus Tata fight, or Indian aviation will stay with Indigo. But taking into context that they pull it off, and I'm sure they'll be able to. There's a clear duopoly that is arising in Indian aviation. But nevertheless, the smaller players will not be inconsequential. Like if you see in terms of mathematical consolidation, like I think a Go Air or a SpiceJet, say going out of the market doesn't matter meaningfully, but the kind of influence they have in on Indian aviation, be in terms of policy making or be in terms of giving jobs to a wider creating livelihoods. So they will always be consequential there. But as a journalist, I am very happy that like prime group like Tata's have focused so much on aviation, and it's very much clear that civil aviation is going to be the point number one in any PowerPoint presentation that goes on in Bombay House. That is something which makes me happy, and I hope it stays the same way. But I also would like to see probably like much more foreign participation in Indian aviation, and if the rule about substantial ownership and effective control making an Indian holding 51% is the barrier behind that, I should say it can be abolished, and because the kind of and again comparing it to automobile, the kind of how it developed when Suzuki came into Maruti, and that's why Maruti Suzuki is what Maruti Suzuki is today. I don't think without Suzuki that would have happened. And the kind of role that Hyundai has played in Indian automobile sector, that has happened completely due to foreign equity participation. And I would like to see the same in Indian aviation. It's happening happening a lot more on the airport side. I would like to see that happening much more on the airline side too.
Interesting thoughts. Let's see where things move from here on. So Arindam, that gets us to the end of the recording. And thanks a lot for sparing time for us. And I hope our listeners enjoy listening this as much I enjoyed listening to your answers and this conversation. So thank you again for joining in. And good luck, especially with the interview with Tim Clark whenever you get it. And let's hope it's soon.
Thank you so much, Amaya. And I should mention again that I learn a lot from your writing, learn a lot from your blogs, and I hope you keep enlightening the sector and the journalists covering the sector so much more from your views and perspective.